Can you stand the shock of stark terror when nature defies its own laws and spawns a creature born 50 million years out of time? Reptilicus. See the titanic trampler of human life destroy a mighty city. See missiles and atom bombs powerless as the behemoth of death challenges the world of science. See a civilization riot with fear as Reptilicus causes terror such as mankind has never known. Reptilicus. Half reptile, half mammal, all monster. See Reptilicus in color from American International Pictures. See, and you still won't believe what you saw. Reptilicus.
We're not talking about actors. We mean a real monster.
I brought her back. She'll live and I'll get her another body.
I know they're gonna catch me, but don't let anyone see me like that. Please, doctor, help me!
Biologically speaking, it's of primary importance that man should want to mate. Hey, that's...
You don't get all your kicks from surfing, do you?
We want to be free to ride our machines without being hassled by the man. And we want to get loaded.
You think you're gonna make a slave of the world? I'll see you in hell first!
The American International Podcast.
Are you ready?
Join us as we go back in time, over 60 years ago, when dragons walked the earth. Well, at least one did. I'm Jeff Markin.
And I'm Cheryl Lightfoot.
And in case you haven't guessed, on this episode of American International Podcast, we are taking a look at Reptilicus from 1961.
Reptilicus was directed by Sidney W. Pink, written by Melchior and Sidney W. Pink.
Reptilicus stars Carl Ottosen as General Mark Grayson, and Smyrner as Lise Martens, Mimi Heinrich as Karen Martens, Asbjørn Andersen as Professor Otto Martens, Marla Behrens as Connie Miller, Svend Mejding as Svend Viltorft, Povl Wøldike as Dr. Peter Dalby, Dirch as Peterson.
It also stars Wisborg as Captain Brandt, Mogens Brandt as Police Chief Hassig, Kjeld Peterson as Police Officer Olsen, Alfred Wilken as Commander Vanguard, Poul Thompson as Captain Naval, Claus Toksvig as himself, Birthe Wilke as herself, Alex Suhr as Alex, Bent Velby as Brandt's driver, Borgemoller Grimstrup as farmer, and Dirk Melchior as farmer eaten by Reptilicus.
Those are some fun names.
Yeah, we practiced these for a while.
So the film starts out with some narration, telling us that somewhere in the forbidding tundra mountains of Lapland, high above the Arctic Circle, a group of mining engineers were prospecting for copper. But what they unearthed was a story that was to terrorize the entire world.
Our narrator is someone we won't meet for a while, because at the time he was narrating this, he was far away and didn't know anything of what he was about to experience.
What we see during this is men in beige jumpsuits and hard hats. These are the mining engineers we've heard tell of. They're working with a big drill, and it's brought up, and there's something attached to it.
Well, it's not so much that. As one of the miners who's holding the drill and helping with the placement of it looks at his hands, realizes they're all red, he sniffs it. This is blood. And from those bloody hands comes our title, Reptilicus. The men start pulling the caked earth off the drill bit, and they find a leathery flap of skin. It's wound up in the coils. They also find some fossilized bone pieces.
They're not sure what they may have impaled beneath the earth, but it is decided that the best course of action now is to turn off the drill for the time being.
Oh, definitely. The foreman of the mining crew is Svend Viltorft. He's sort of the hero of this, although he does have to take a sideline to someone else later on in the movie. He wants to get to the bottom of this mystery.
So he consults with the American driller, who has drilled all over the world.
As an American.
And he's asked for his expert opinion. And the American believes that whatever is down there couldn't possibly be alive. But they're going to continue with suspending the drilling anyway and radio this in to report it.
They want to send their findings to Copenhagen. Svend asks for a Polaroid because they're going to shoot a picture. And we hear that within 3 hours, 3 men join them. Professor Otto Martens and Dr. Peter Dalby from the Copenhagen University, and Hans Carlsen, a newspaper reporter. These men reasoned out the meaning of the puzzle, but not the deadly implications.
Professor Martens explains that the fossil bones of some creatures lie just below the surface, so this is easily explained. But Svend asked how they can explain the tissue and the blood, and that's not so easily explained.
But Dr. Dalby reasons that all are part of the creature. Those are his words, not ours. Svend isn't satisfied with that explanation. His sample wasn't frozen, and nor was the blood. But Dr. Martens says that the heat of the drill likely thawed it out before he had his grubby hands on it.
Then there's nothing exciting about this discovery at all, says Svend. On the contrary, up until this point in time, all of the ancient animal remains they've discovered have been mammals, but this one is a reptile.
And a large one. Dr. Martens then details the plans for excavating all the remains and transporting them to the university for study. And then we cut to, for some reason, a commercial airplane taking off, the landing gear going up into the plane, and we see it flying through the air.
Presumably transporting the remains to the Copenhagen Aquarium in Denmark for study.
Well, the next title card does indeed say Copenhagen. And we see a little bit of the city as the scene progresses.
We see a red convertible driving around. It's being driven by Lise Martens. She is the daughter of Professor Martens, and she is dropping off her father at the aquarium.
She's going to let him go to work with his old bones, because that's what he really likes to do. Dr. Dalby is already there examining the bones, although he's not sure that reconstruction is possible. He's convinced that they're all from the same creature, despite Dr. Martens' doubts. But Dr. Martens thinks that this would be unlike any other creature ever found.
Just then, the professor's other, younger daughter comes in. This is Karen Martens, and she rushes in with a telegram. Professor Martens reads it. It's from Svend from Lapland, the mining engineer who we met earlier.
He's found even more bones 600 meters away from the first location. He's bringing them there, and he'll arrive in an hour. So his telegram didn't really give them a lot of time to prepare.
So Professor Martens instructs Karen to go pick Svend up and tells her that she'll recognize him by his third eye and mustache. And she's like, seriously, how am I going to know him? And he's like, since when do I have to tell you how to find a man?
And that works for, I guess she leaves. She didn't sound that Valley girl. Later, Dr. Martens is examining a bone fragment as ominous music plays in the background. He tells Svend he's never seen bone fragments like this before, and Svend asks why. Dr. Martens says they're resilient, but strong, like the bones of a shark. Then Svend asks about the live tissue he found. Dr. Martens takes him to the deep freeze where they're storing the tail. This is what Svend brought in. And they tell him that the size of that tail leads them to believe that the entire animal is among the largest prehistoric creatures ever found. It could be 90 feet or more.
Karen interrupts to ask if they're through talking about frozen matters, if she might thaw out Svend and show him around. Professor Martens insists that Svend stay with them while he's in town, but before Svend can accept or decline, Lisa enters, interrupting them.
She comes in dragging Mr. Peterson with her, as she was apparently asked to do. Everyone seems shocked to see them. We froze a movie at this point, and everyone's looking sort of wide-eyed at what just came in. And you would too if you saw him. Lisa immediately cockblocks Karen, insisting on chaperoning Svend herself. And Karen would go with, of course. And she leads him away by his free arm, because Karen's on the other one.
Dr. Dalby says he envies that young man, and Professor Martens agrees. He will be busy now, he says.
That's their father, guys. Yuck.
So Peterson is just hanging out, waiting for further instruction. Professor Martens has brought him in as kind of a night guard / janitor. He will stay there at the aquarium and keep an eye on things after hours. And Dalby shows Peters the freezing room. Again, his words, not mine. And tells him that this is the most important thing. The room must be kept at this temperature, which we see is negative 20 degrees centigrade. And he mentions it runs on electricity.
Dr. Dalby will show him where the controls are later. Then Dr. Martens tells Peterson to go get settled. Not where to go or how to get settled, but just to go. So Peterson cheerfully agrees. He goes out in the corridor where he sees a tank. In that tank, according to the sign, is an electric eel. Peterson sounds out the label on the tank phonetically, then snaps his fingers to get the eel's attention. Doesn't get it, so he stops and strolls away, noting how everything there runs on electricity.
How novel.
That's hilarious. Not.
That night, Peterson is walking around with a flashlight. He goes into the lab where Dalby is working late. Dalby tells Peterson he could take care of things here, so Peterson wanders off.
Later, a thunderstorm starts to brew in. Dr. Dalby checks on the tail, but he's kind of sleepy now. The tail's still frozen. For some reason, this bit of film looks like a 3D image, but it's not. He enters the freezing room and scrapes off a small sample of the tail flesh. Back at his desk, he looks at it under his microscope. But before he can record any findings, he falls asleep on his desk.
The camera then pans over to the door, which Dalby had neglected to latch tightly. The door slowly swings open. We see the temperature is now -5 degrees at 5:06 a.m., then 10 degrees, then almost 20 degrees at 8:05 a.m. The thawing tail is dripping blood all over the floor.
This is when Dr. Martens comes back. He's with Lisa again. I don't know why, she doesn't work there. Martens is telling Lisa how Mr. Peterson is inspecting everything now. But then they see Dr. Dalby with his head on his desk. They assume the worst, try to rouse him. And eventually they do. He's not dead, just tired.
Lisa is relieved, but then she notices the open door to the freezer room. The trio rushes in to discover that the tail is no longer frozen. Professor Martens is ready to throttle Peterson, but Dalby jumps in and explains that he had sent Peterson away, so the fault lies with him.
So Martens turns his ire on Dalby. The tail is decomposing now. Even if they refreeze it, they can't save the flesh. Then Lisa notices the circular wound in the tail from the drill bit looks different. Dr. Martens sees it and agrees. The wound is apparently starting to heal itself. And that's not all. There's granulation on the cut end of the tail.
Do you know what this means? You let it thaw, and now it is alive.
So he didn't screw up. Yay.
And we fade to black.
Later, Dr. Martens is welcoming Miss Miller. He tells her how unaccustomed he is to seeing a beautiful woman connected with science. Connie Miller very patiently assures him that her capabilities as a scientist are fine, but he's only interested in her looks, which, as an old man, he admires without apology.
Lisa is in the room too, and she's kind of wandering around, intrigued at the awkward attempt at flirting. Connie Miller reminds the professor that she's not here to visit and that she's here for a job, and the professor says that they are expecting another visitor from the United Nations. And just then, the other visitor arrives and introduces himself, Brigadier General Mark Grayson. He's come as instructed, but doesn't know why he's here.
Martens greets Grayson, but he's immune to Danish charm. Martens tells him that there'll be a press conference and a demonstration later that day that will explain all. He introduces the two Americans to each other, and Grayson gives Miller a full body scan, ogles her entire body. But he only says, "American?" She says yes, and pleased to meet you. Martens also introduces his daughter, Lisa, who hopes the general enjoys his stay. The general thanks her, but says he's hoping that it won't be a long one. The shorter the stay, the happier for me. And then he checks out Lisa's rack, too. However, he does add, no offense meant.
And then we cut to the same location, but later in the day. Professor Martens is giving a lecture to, I guess, the press?
Svend and Karen are there, too.
The general is also standing by, as is Lisa.
As is a different Miss Miller.
And Connie Miller is nowhere to be seen, or is she?
There are two different actresses that played the role, and we are supposed to only see the English language one, but they made a mistake. A little continuity goof. In the back of the room, Dr. Dalby introduces the general to Captain Brandt of the Royal Danish Guard. He'll be the general's liaison when he's here. Grayson says thanks, but let's listen to Martens.
And the professor continues. The specimen they found is alive, and regeneration has occurred. He then mansplains regeneration to the gathered folk. He gives examples of other animals that demonstrate regeneration, reptiles, starfish, flatworms. General Grayson shakes his head incredulously. A journalist asks the professor what he's calling this discovery, and the professor admits that they haven't come up with a name yet.
The reporter suggests, rather cheekily, Reptilicus martensius, and the doctor chuckles and says, Reptilicus is good enough. Then he invites everyone to go into the lab so they can peer into the tank. They must see more than we do, because the headlines start flipping onto the screen.
The Washington Gazette exclaims, prehistoric monster growing in huge tank.
We see a few other newspapers in languages that Jeff and I don't speak. But finally we get the London Journal, who declares, incubator tank feeds monster from past. I think it must be a Murdoch paper.
Now we're in what appears to be General Grayson's makeshift office. He's reading the paper out loud, clearly enjoying the part that calls him out by name.
I'm not so sure about that, because he slams the paper down rather disgustedly after he reads this. The UN has placed all of its scientific knowledge at the disposal of the university, and General Mark Grayson, well known for his exploits in the Battle of the Bulge, is in charge of the protective forces. I think he's mad because he's only in charge of 2 captains, 3 office boys, and a damn lizard.
And now we go back with Peterson. He's apparently more comfortable in his new position as he's getting a little handsy with the scientific equipment. He's looking through a microscope, then decides to take a closer look at the sandwich he's eating. He places a bit of that under the lens and is nauseated by what he sees.
Because what he sees are little microscopic beasties kicking around in his cheese. The scene fades out, but Peterson returns. This time he's in the hallway outside the electric eel tank. He sticks one of his paws inside the tank and either does get shocked or he just pretends to. But he stops his little routine when he hears some rumbling from the Reptilicus tank. He looks up. I don't know what he sees because we don't see it. But wide-eyed, he yells, "Mom!" and then he runs to ring the alarm.
General Grayson and Captain Brandt are standing outside when the alarm goes off, and they rush inside. And everyone else does as well. They join Peterson in the hallway, including Professor Martens and Dr. Dalby.
And Svend.
And Sven.
And Karen.
Including Professor Martens and Dr. Dalby and Sven and Karen. Peterson motions to the room from which he heard the sound, and Martens goes to investigate.
When he comes back, he reports that everything is fine. Peterson gripes that he heard the thing moving, and Martens said you likely did, but as of now, Reptilicus has no higher conscious life. Not yet. So what he heard was an involuntary embryonic movement. Of course, duh. Why didn't he know that?
Captain Brandt slaps Peterson on the back and says if anything else happens, just let them know.
Then we cut to Dr. Martens. He's listening to a tape in which he has described the beast's current appearance. It seems totally unlike any known dinosaur. Huge bony scales on its back, incredibly thick legs hardly formed as yet, and slimy secretions emanating from glands in its mouth. It has a burning, corrosive effect. Cool. Then as the tape continues, we hear that Dr. Dalby has prescribed more nutrients. Martens then records himself saying, "We will try, but we're going to have to build a bigger tank."
In Grayson's office, Brandt asks if there's anything that he can do for the general, and the general says, yeah, get me transferred out of this damn place. And Brandt suggests that he go out and explore the city. And so that's just what he does.
And so do we. He doesn't go it alone, though. He and Connie Miller go for a sightseeing tour. And what we see are famous Copenhagen landmarks like the Little Mermaid statue, some fountains, a lot of people on bicycles. The general tells Miller that they say the Danes are born on bicycles. And Connie agrees.
Grayson warns Connie that he has invited Captain Brandt to join them later for dinner at Tivoli. And then we see some more sights.
We see the 7 wonders of the Danish world, basically. But then we end the night at Tivoli, where Chanteuse is singing the praise of this establishment. We hear the song Tivoli Nights in its entirety.
Back in the lab, Dr. Dalby is again working alone, as he always does on stormy nights such as this. The lights go out, and Dalby grabs a flashlight. He scans the room, but other than Peterson sleeping in a chair, he notices nothing unusual.
But then Dalby goes into the hallway, and he sees something moving in Reptilicus' tank. Mouth agape, he rushes to make a phone call, but the lines are down. He wakes up Peterson and tells him to go directly to the police and bring them back immediately.
So Peterson goes outside in the storm and jumps on his bicycle. At the police station, police officer Olsen is playing chess when a very wet Peterson barges in. A brief cutaway shows us that Reptilicus is now roaming around outside.
Peterson's trying to explain what happened, but of course he sounds crazy and the way he looks doesn't help him any either. The policemen don't believe him.
He goes as far back as to explain that the electricity is out, even the electric eel, and that the monster is loose. Olsen tells Peterson to go tell Dr. Dalby about it, and Peterson tells Olsen that Dalby sent Peterson here to tell them. And at this piece of information, Olsen finally springs into action.
He makes a phone call. I'm sure that they do more as well, but that's all we see. Later, Grayson, Martens, Lisa, and Connie Miller gather somberly in the hallway outside where Reptilicus used to live, and they examine all that remains of Dalby, his broken wireframe glasses.
Reptilicus must have experienced a growth spurt, perhaps caused by the electrical energy in the air from the storm, or perhaps from the increase in nutrients they were providing. Captain Brandt comes in and says they followed the tracks down to the water, where they disappear. The general finally has something to do.
He says they have a fight on their hands, and now he needs to set up a base of operations. He asks Brandt for a good location for this, and Brandt recommends the barracks of the Royal Guard. Then we cut rather shakily to the war room, already in progress. Grayson tells them that they all have their orders, then gives them a few more just in case they didn't get it the first time. The chief of police is to handle the citizen population. Dr. Martens is the scientific and technical advisor, and Brandt is to keep the radio manned at all times. But just as they're about to go out and follow their orders, the phone rings, and Grayson answers. First he yells, "Where?" And then he says, "Stay out of his way."
He slams down the receiver and announces they're leaving at once. Reptilicus has been sighted at a small farm on the coast.
So everyone mobilizes for action. The general, Svend, and some soldiers pull up to a farmer who's outstanding in his field. Haha. He reports that the beast devoured 14 of his best cows. What, it couldn't take the worst ones? The farmer points to the general direction that Reptilicus went. But before rushing off, General Grayson tells the farmer that he needs to get all the people and get out because Reptilicus could come back. And then we see the bloody remains of a cow head with the nose still attached.
The troops head out toward the barn. They separate to take the barn from all angles, and one party sees Reptilicus crawl behind a building. They call in their sighting to General Grayson. And the troops all get into position with guns and tanks and cannons. And as Reptilicus rears his head, the general commands them to give them everything they've got.
Then he tells Svend to be ready to get out of there in a hurry because all this artillery is having no effect. Eventually, Reptilicus just sort of strolls off on his own power. The general thinks that Reptilicus's armored plates are blocking all the bullets and bombs and such. Svend says now the beast is headed for the beach. And Grayson asks Svend if he can get him there before Reptilicus. And Svend promises to at least try.
So the troops all jump in their jeeps and start driving toward the beach. General Grayson and Svend get there first, and they beat Reptilicus there. Then Svend spots Reptilicus near a farmhouse, a ways away.
Inside this farmhouse, there's a farm family who just sat down at their farm table for a farm dinner. But then the house shakes and the roof collapses in. The father goes outside, I guess, and then Reptilicus sort of eats him. It's a really bad special effect done with a person on blue screen, but what it looks like is a puppet just ate a cartoon.
And it happens twice because they flip it and show it twice. It's really weird. It looks like he's eating two people, but he's eating the first one first from the right and then the left, I guess.
And it's not even any person who was in the farmhouse. It's wearing different clothes. It's a different actor. Not convincing at all.
Very strange. So as the troops roll in, Reptilicus starts spewing out a green acidic substance.
It looks like slime from Nickelodeon.
And Professor Martens and Lise and Connie Miller are now also on the scene.
General Grayson, who was impatiently waiting for his equipment, finally has his tank crew there. The tank shoots a barrage of fire at Reptilicus. Reptilicus catches fire a little bit, but it's not that damaging. He screeches and he barfs up some more slime, but then he slides into the sea where he puts out the flames. Everyone looks on in stunned amazement.
Captain Brandt says that maybe he'll die, but Connie Miller says not a chance. He's just going off to let his wounds heal.
And then he'll be back as good as new.
Back at the base, Grayson, Brandt, and Professor Martens are debriefing with a couple of officers from the Royal Guard.
Grayson says that the beast is a cross between one of these, and he points at a picture of an apatosaurus, and an amphibious reptile. Martin says more than that. He says that nature went through an experimental stage some 70 million years ago, and Reptilicus is the missing link between reptile and mammal. I beg to differ, but what do I know?
They all agree that they need to find Reptilicus, but it won't be easy when he's underwater. The professor says that Reptilicus is not inherently an underwater creature, and he will need to return to the surface to breathe.
Grayson wants to use some of the university's underwater cameras. He's going to put it on one of the Navy boats to help for the search. But Martin says that their energy would be better spent on land, around where Reptilicus was born, i.e. the university. Instinct will draw him back here, says Dr. Martens. Grayson says all right. Then he turns to the Navy officer and says, "We're counting on you to find him for us."
And then we cut to footage of ships out looking for Reptilicus.
Allegedly.
Back at the base, General Grayson is getting frustrated. It's been a week with no word of Reptilicus.
Grayson tells Svend that he should go home, but Svend is sticking with Grayson. This cheers him up, and he calls Svend stubborn, but I think that's a good thing to him.
Svend says that others are stubborn. He's firm.
Just then, the Navy boat sees something on their radar. The underwater camera reveals that, yes, it is Reptilicus, snoozing in shallow water.
So Grayson commands them to execute Plan A, and with that, the ships start dropping bombs. From his office at the aquarium, Professor Martens hears the blasts and rushes outside. He quickly figures out what's going on and runs off.
He apparently has an unobstructed view of the ship maneuvers from campus. Miller goes to Grayson, aghast that they are bombing Reptilicus. Grayson's like, "Hell yeah, we're bombing that SOB, and this time we'll get him." Connie Miller says, "No, you can't." But Grayson's too excited by this turn of events, and he tells her to stay out of this.
He wants to enjoy listening to his explosions in peace. By now, Professor Martens has reached a boat. Simultaneously, a bomb is dropped near Reptilicus' head, disturbing his slumber. Back with Professor Martens, asks whoever is in charge of this boat to take him out, but then the professor starts suffering chest pains.
Oh no. Back at Command Central, Connie Miller lays it on the line for the general. If they blow Reptilicus to bits, they'll never recover every body part, and anything left over will grow into an all-new Reptilicus. Finally, Grayson gets it. and he orders a ceasefire. But it comes too late. A bit of Reptilicus, one of his legs, is blown off and sinks to the floor of the sea. Grayson is really bummed because he wanted to kill Reptilicus while he was recuperating, but now they have to wait for it to emerge, regenerated and ready for a fight.
Just then the phone rings again, and this time Svend answers it. It's the hospital. Professor Martens had been brought in. Lise is in tears, and General Grayson tells Lise he'll take her to see her father. But then he asks Connie Miller to accompany Lise instead, because the general can't leave. He's got work to do. Later, the general is poring over paperwork, and Svend has fallen asleep at his desk across the room.
Connie comes in to tell Mark to take a rest. He's been there for nearly 14 straight days. Grayson points at the nearly as dedicated Svend, who's snoozing on his desk, as Jeff said. But Grayson agrees that he can leave now. They have outposts ringed around the Baltic Sea, so if Reptilicus gets out of the water, they'll know. They mention his health, and we hear that he's fine. And then in a burst of great timing, Brandt comes in with a sighting. Reptilicus overturned a freighter. Brandt points out the location on a map. It's somewhere outside Sweden. And then we see some tinted blue stock footage of shipwrecks.
Voiceover from General Grayson tells us that Reptilicus was on the rampage, and they never saw him, but they did see the trail of death and destruction he left behind. So back at the base, the general and captain are pointing out on a map where Reptilicus was last seen, and it's in the sea not far from the aquarium.
Grayson tells Karen her father was right, but Reptilicus did take out a fishing village and some Swedish freighters.
At this, Svend looks distraught, and Karen asks what's troubling him. He's feeling guilt because he's the one who found Reptilicus. But, she reminds him, it was her father who brought Reptilicus here. Besides, any man would have done what Svend had done.
And now we're at the beach. It's an ordinary day. Families are gathered on the beach, and then we see the Danish Frankie and Annette. They're standing in front of a movie projection of the sea. As Annette applies her lipstick, she sees in her mirror that the giant sea beast is behind her. She's shocked, but only for a second, because Reptilicus pukes green slime onto her and Frankie. The beach starts to clear as the monster heads their way. But from what we saw, everyone on the beach got slimed.
A mobile unit is radioing news of this attack to the base. As the troops move out, a curfew is called. Citizens are warned to stay indoors and to not be afraid, as the military has everything well in hand. So the members of the military all take their positions, and they wait. And they wait. And they wait. Suddenly, one of the men spots Reptilicus approaching the city. Guns are pointed, and artillery is fired, and green slime is spewed. The public, which has been instructed to stay indoors, is panicking in the streets.
Grayson says angrily that Reptilicus has already reached the edge of the city, which limits what they can do in response. No bombs, no heavy artillery. Reptilicus is now rampaging through the city. He's erping up slime everywhere. Copenhagen now looks like a war zone. On the radio, Brandt reports that they can't use the flamethrowers now due to the beast's acid slime. They just can't get close enough.
Grayson says they'll have to take alternative measures, and everyone seems to know what this means because a bunch of them rush off. Then a call comes in that Reptilicus is headed for a bridge. I didn't get the name.
Sounds like Ladmo. Panicky people are also running towards the bridge. The police can't stop them, but someone can. For reasons known only to him, the bridge operator decides that this would be a good time to raise the drawbridge.
But this doesn't stop the fleeing people from going over it on foot and their bicycles.
And the sight of this makes the bridge operator cover his face and go cower in the corner. But Svend and Grayson arrive, and Svend lowers the bridge.
And thus the crowd can continue to flee. Grayson tells Svend to go tell Brandt to take command of the ground forces. And then Grayson and Svend return to the base.
Back at HQ, we hear that most of the casualties are due to that acid slime. Grayson bursts in and says that they have one chance. They can't lick Reptilicus with their arms, small arms, and field pieces. So they'll have to drive him out of the city to open areas, and then clobber him with the heavy stuff there.
Right now, they calculate his location as being near the stock exchange.
He's not selling shares, though. He's sliming and destroying. Grayson says Brandt will have to use heavy fire to drive Reptilicus in one direction. Svend says that the destruction will be terrible, and Grayson says, we have no choice.
He calls down to Brandt and tells him to start firing the heavier stuff.
We hear him screaming at first, but then good news comes in. That plan worked. Reptilicus is leaving the city. And Grayson calls Brandt back to HQ.
Now a plan is being formed. Little army trucks are placed on the large map on the table, and what they're planning is setting up a line to drive Reptilicus out to open ground.
Or the suburbs, what they say. The line behind him will only open fire if Reptilicus turns back towards the city. In addition to that, They're only to fire on direct orders from Grayson. The general thinks that they can turn him if everyone opens fire at the same time. However,
Reptilicus is spotted, and some trigger-happy soldiers fire against orders. Reptilicus goes for them and breaks through the line, foiling the plan.
And he's now back in the city. The chief of police is trying to evacuate, but the streets are impassable. Reptilicus is so unpredictable. Grayson wonders out loud if he'll have time to try the really heavy stuff, a bomb, and Svend says that he'll be killing thousands if he does.
Just then, Professor Martens comes in. He says that using a bomb is out of the question because 1,000 little Reptilicus pieces can grow into 1,000 full-size Reptilicuses. But the professor doesn't have any alternative suggestions. But it's okay because this seems to have gotten through to Grayson. Then the professor collapses, and Lise and Karen accompany the professor out of the room. Reptilicus is still on a rampage. A cannon blows up the building he's standing behind so they can get a better shot at him.
Later, Lise and Connie return to the war room. Grayson asks about Martens, and they say that he's been given a hypo by the doctor. And he's still unconscious, but he's resting with Karen by his side. Svend says that he wishes they could give Reptilicus a hypo. Grayson says, drug him? Svend dismisses it as wishful thinking, but Grayson thinks he just may have hit on an answer.
He asks if there was a drug powerful enough to knock out a reptile this big, and Connie Miller says there is, but they will need a gallon of it or more, and it will have to be administered directly into the creature's bloodstream. Lisa says that the university lab should have what they need to mix up a batch.
But then Lisa asks how they're going to administer it. But Grayson has a plan for that too. He asks his men to acquire some equipment. And then we see more running in the street. Svend and the general and the women fight through it as they go to the university. Reptilicus is now at Tivoli, but no one's singing now.
Connie Miller and Lisa Martens immediately set to work in the laboratory to make giant reptile knockout drops.
And General Grayson busies himself with rigging up a potion delivery system.
Outside, people continue to run, and Reptilicus continues to roar and spew green fluid.
What Grayson is doing is taking a warhead and taking out all of the explosives. He'll instead fill it with the drug, which will be used to inject it into Reptilicus's bloodstream. Brandt objects that the monster is nearly impenetrable, but Grayson wants to shoot into the fleshy tissue of its mouth. Brandt argues that that would have to be shot at point-blank range. Grayson says he knows this.
So they take their warhead and they get into position. Grayson orders Brandt to pull back. If they fail at this mission, it will be up to Brandt to take command. Grayson raises the bazooka and takes his aim, but just then an ambulance goes by and distracts Reptilicus. Reptilicus turns away, and now they can't get a good shot at his mouth.
This spurs Brandt to leap into a jeep and drive directly at Reptilicus. Grayson yells no, but Brandt drives all the way up to the beast, where he has crushed as Reptilicus belly flops on top of him. Svend and the general wince at the gruesome turn of events. But it worked.
Now Reptilicus is facing the right direction. The bazooka is loaded and Grayson fires. The shot is good, and Reptilicus falls unconscious to the ground.
The shot looked like a wintergreen lifesaver sparking in his mouth. Now that Reptilicus has been successfully anesthetized, Martens and his daughters and Connie Miller rush to the scene.
They join Grayson and Svend, and Grayson comments that it's a good thing that there are no more like him.
And cue the scene of Reptilicus's severed foot doing a little two-step under the sea. And that's the end.
Wow, that was just kind of sudden, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Joyous music plays and the camera tilts upward, then it tilts downward toward the sea and the music grows more ominous. Then we are reminded of Reptilicus' dismembered member.
I don't think that's appropriate or even accurate.
You are listening to the American International Podcast, where we are discussing Reptilicus from 1961.
There are actually two versions of Reptilicus. They're completely different. The Danish language version was directed by Paul Bang. It cost $133,000, and the American version racked up an additional $100,000 in production expenses.
Principal photography began in July of 1960 at Saga Studios in Denmark. Production on both versions of the film were completed by April of 1961.
In July 1960, the American version started production. This version was filmed in English with a nearly identical cast, except for the actress who played Connie Miller, and it was directed by American producer-director Sidney W. Pink. He and Danish director Paul Bang would film each scene twice, once in Danish and then again in English, with each director changing the setups in between takes. The only cast difference, as we said, was Connie Miller, who was played by Bodil Miller in the Danish version. We did see the one scene where Connie Miller was played by Bodil Miller.
In another filming mishap, 1,000 extras participated in the drawbridge scene, with members of a bicycle club agreeing to plunge into Copenhagen harbor. None of them were stuntmen. However, it was only by sheer luck that any footage of this exists, as no command was given to any of the 5 or 6 cameramen filming the scene to roll film. Luckily, one cameraman rolled anyway, capturing the only film of that sequence.
Samuel Z. Arkoff said in his autobiography that the first time that they got a look at the footage, he shut the film off in disgust, saying, "My God, Sidney, what have you done?" He told Pink that in its current state, the film was unreleasable. Arkoff declared that the dialogue would have to be redubbed because he felt that the sing-song Scandinavian accents would have the serious audiences of sci-fi pictures laughing. This angered Pink, who threatened to sue AIP if they didn't release the picture as it was. But Arkoff wouldn't budge on that.
Pink did file suit 3 months later, however, but Arkoff was confident any jury would hear the rough cut of the film and side with AIP, leaving Sidney a laughingstock. But Pink withdrew the suit after screening the movie with other industry friends and agreed to the English dubbing. Arkoff said of the finished product the picture was not a big hit, but no one questioned the English.
Unfortunately, Pink had instructed all the actors to speak very distinctly so that their English would sound better than it was. But this had the result of making it difficult for those cutting the dubbed versions of the lines, as they had to match the actors' unnatural lip movements as they spoke.
More than just the dubbing, the film itself would have to be extensively reworked by the film's Danish-American screenwriter Ib Melchior before being finally released in America in 1962. Melchior added some insert shots for clarification and dubbed 6 of the voices himself, explaining why several of the male characters sound alike. Scenes of Reptilicus flying over Copenhagen were cut because they were so badly done, and considering how bad the effects were that were left in the film, those sequences must have been truly awful. We already
knew that Pink was threatening legal action against AIP, but Daily Variety reported in June of 1961 that AIP was going to sue Sidney Pink for $1.53 million, alleging that Pink had not made a final edit of the picture and had only delivered portions of the raw negative, all of which was required by December 1st, 1960, for a summer 1961 release. AIP further took issue with the film's dialogue as being Danish English, implying a violation of Pink's agreement to cast only American actors in lead roles.
By July of 1961, Pink filed a $250,000 suit against the AIP and Monarch Books Incorporated over a novelization of his screenplay, which allegedly contained passages of a lewd, lascivious, and wanton nature. Pink also claimed damages to his professional reputation, including the unauthorized use of his name in connection with the book. In October of 1961, Daily Variety wrote that the editing of the film was postponed due to the pending litigation.
But Pink and AIP eventually settled their differences out of court. They even went on to work together again. Pink returned to Denmark to work on Journey to the Seventh Planet for AIP.
Nearly a year later, in October of 1962, Daily Variety reported that Lee Miller was providing the English-language voice of the film's romantic lead.
I presume that's Connie Miller. Since many different marionettes were used to portray Reptilicus in the film, his appearance often kept changing from scene to scene. Sometimes the frills on his neck would be doubled, or random tufts of hair would go from the top of his body to the bottom of it.
Reptilicus was released in Denmark on February 25, 1961. The Danish version was released with a special screening at Saga's Theater in Copenhagen.
Arkoff and Nicholson knew that even in its revised form, Reptilicus would never be a standalone film. They packaged the film with the Italian export Marco Polo.
The American version was released on November 28, 1962 in Seattle and Cincinnati. The Los Angeles Open was on January 16, 1963. The box office return is listed as $800,000.
So it did make a profit. We already mentioned that Sidney Pink wasn't happy with the novelization of the film, which was released in paperback at the time of its original release. That was a AIP promotional tool. The author of that book was Dean Owen, whose real name was Dudley Dean McGoffey.
In 1961, Charlton Comics produced a comic book based on the film. Reptilicus lasted 2 issues. After the copyright had lapsed, Charlton modified the creature's look and renamed it Reptisaurus. The series was renamed Reptisaurus the Terrible and would continue from issue number 3 before being canceled with issue number 8 in 1962. This was followed by a one-shot called Reptisaurus Special Edition in 1963. Reptisaurus also made a cameo in the 12th issue of another Charlton giant monster comic, Gorgo.
Box Office Magazine recommended that theater owners use Reptilicus blow-ups for the lobby poster art and theater front displays. They also recommended having a local media co-sponsor a contest seeking the longest list of thriller attractions, a la King Kong. Also, teaser signs and street stencils reading "Reptilicus is coming" would create interest, they said.
Taglines for the film include "Invincible, Indestructible. What was this beast 50 million years out of time?"
A high-tension story of a prehistoric monster no modern weapon can kill.
"See, a mighty city trampled to destruction. See, missiles and atom bombs powerless. See, civilization rioting with fear."
A horrifying tale, T-A-I-L, get it, of terror. And this next one I put in just to see if Jeff could speak Danish.
Spinding Ogsjov, Tarme Ogshach.
Doesn't that make you want to see it? To no one's surprise, Reptilicus received mostly negative reviews from American critics. The Hollywood Citizen News wrote, "I suppose it would be supercilious to say that Reptilicus looked ridiculous, but in a critical essence it ranks far below most films of the nature, failing in even the technical department to register any appreciable degree of surprise or suspense."
The Monthly Film Bulletin said that Reptilicus was a disappointing addition to the abnormal zoology cycle. The lame and plotting narrative is made worse by singularly bad acting. The thin story is padded out by superfluous material, including a contribution by a cabaret singer and some travelogue views of Copenhagen.
Box Office Magazine, always trying to see the best in everything, said this filmed in Copenhagen effort is afforded considerable special effects, coupled with spirited delineation by a predominantly European cast. That review also drew an unusual comparison between Reptilicus and another American monster movie, saying the closest this comes to predecessor films in similar genre, perhaps, is Paramount's The Blob, also leaving the disposition of the terrorizing mass to the audience's imagination.
Author and film critic Leonard Maltin awarded the film a bomb, his lowest rating for a film. In his review of the film, Maltin wrote that the film was only good for laughs, as the script hits every conceivable monster movie cliché right to the final shot.
This isn't a contemporary review either, but Mark Brunson from Creative Loafing gave the film a negative review. Awkward dubbing of foreign actors, special effects that look like they cost $1.50, laughably earnest dialogue, wince-inducing comic relief from a dim-witted character. If ever a movie was made that deserved to be showcased on the cult series Mystery Science Theater 3000, it's this one. And he was right. Reptilicus was the featured movie on MST3K The Return as the first episode of the Netflix-era shows.
As Denmark's only giant monster film, Reptilicus has a cult following in its home country. Sidney Pink attempted to produce a remake of the film in 2001 after seeing the box office success of Godzilla in 1998, but unfortunately, Pink died in 2002 before pre-production on the sequel could even begin, and it was never made.
Reptilicus did have a second life, though. Clips from the movie were woven into other shows. In the 2010 Futurama episode, Inagata Dalila, the film was referenced by Richard M. Nixon's head in a jar.
A clip of the film was featured in the 2003 South Park episode Cancelled.
Clips from this film appeared on various episodes of the 1960s TV show The Monkees.
And in the Green Acres TV show, 1968 Season 3 episode Instant Family, Reptilicus was playing at the drive-in theater.
Believe it or not, we saw a lot of the cast members in different AIP films. For example, Anne Smyrner, who played Lisa Martens, went on to appear in Journey to the Seventh Planet in 1962, Mission Stardust in 1967, part of AITV's Fantastic Science Fiction Theater, and House of $1,000 in 1967.
Mimi Heinrich, who played Karen Martens, would also appear in Journey to the Seventh Planet in 1962.
I wonder if they were sisters there too. Carl Ottosen, who played General Mark Grayson, appeared in Operation Camel in 1960 and went on to Journey to the Seventh Planet in 1962.
Mogens Brandt as Police Chief Hassing had previously appeared in Operation Camel, 1960.
Robert Cornthwaite, an uncredited voice actor, appeared as Mr. Reed in Future World in 1976.
Sven Johansson, who was an uncredited naval officer, had previously appeared in Operation Camel in 1960 and would appear in Dagmar's Hot Pants Incorporated in 1971, released by Trans-American Films.
As we said, Sidney Pink went on to work with AIP again in Journey to the Seventh Planet in 1962, where he served as writer, producer, director. He was also the writer and producer of The Angry Red Planet back in 1959, and Pyro, The Thing Without a Face in 1964. And in 1968, he produced Madigan's Millions for Trans-American Films.
Writer Ib Melchior served as writer-director for The Angry Red Planet in 1959 and The Time Travelers in 1964, and he was also screenwriter for Journey to the Seventh Planet in 1962 and Planet of the Vampires 1965. So that's all we were able to excavate on Reptilicus, Cheryl. So it's time for our ratings. How would you grade Reptilicus using our AIP scale, where A is awesome, I is intermediate, and P is pathetic?
I think first I should start by apologizing to the movie Conga. I gave that film a low grade due in part to the bad special effects, but compared to Reptilicus, Conga is a masterpiece, both in story and visual effects. Reptilicus is just a mess. The special effects are funny at first, but after a while, they just made me sad for all involved. Anyone who has this film as part of their permanent record, man, that must suck. The story isn't so bad, but the execution of it is. First, we have the lame attempts at comic relief provided by comedian Dirch as Peterson. And they're so unwelcome here. I guess we should feel relieved, though, that the American version of the film excised a scene where Passer sang a song about Reptilicus to a group of young children. I shudder to think how that would have gone. But Passer's shameless mugging to camera and broad physical comedy movements took me out of the film in the same way that Steve Franken's character did in Time Travelers. You can go back and listen to that episode. Carl Ottosen as General Mark Grayson gets the most screen time in this movie, and that's a shame, because he's almost as annoying as Passer. Not really the actor's fault, though, it's the horrible dub job of the General's voice. He speaks in a monotone with a staccato delivery. By the second act, I couldn't stand the sight of him, or sound. So now I have to ask if this movie is so bad it's good. It certainly is silly. Instead of making a rubber-suited monster a la Godzilla, the producers give us a ridiculous marionette, wires and all, and some cartoonish green slime so that it might go on a spree of murder and mayhem. But it just seems so pathetic, even for the time period. Conga came out that same year with effects that, though they seem quaint today, were good enough that I could suspend disbelief at least a little and enjoy the film. Reptilicus, not so much. This movie seems to have been doomed from the get-go, with Sidney Pink making bad choice after bad choice. He shot each scene twice, but with a different director, in one case a different actor, in a different language each time. I mean, that makes no sense, given that the movie had to be dubbed anyway. When I learned this about the movie, I was reminded of the backstory of The Room, where auteur Tommy Wiseau filmed each scene twice, with two cameras, one 35mm camera and one that shot in digital HD, for no good reason. He didn't even use the HD footage. It was all a colossal waste of money. A bad decision made by someone who had no idea what they were doing. Barkov and Nicholson probably thought the same thing about Sidney Pink after watching the rough cut of Reptilicus. A lot has been written about their reaction to the rough cut of the film, so it's not hard to put myself in their place, feeling like Pink had just lit $100,000 on fire and now they had to watch it burn. I'm sure that, plus all the costs associated with redubbing and reworking the film, not to mention the lawsuits that arose from the dispute between Pink and AIP, left a bad taste in their mouth. I know that they patched up their differences and worked together again, but even so, the stink coming off this whole production is bad. I think there are a few things to praise in Reptilicus. Among the core cast, Anne Smyrner and Mimi Heinrich as Lise and Karen Martens, and Marla Behrens as Connie Miller added a nice feminine energy to the movie, although the roles could have been expanded a little. Asbjørn Andersen as Professor Otto Martens was suitably professorial, and I thought Mejding as Svend Viltorft was a much more compelling character than General Grayson. I wish he'd been the lead in this. But all that is not enough to justify bumping up the grade that I'm giving the movie. I'm giving Reptilicus a P for pathetic. I can't see any reason to give it more, as even when it got the Mystery Science Theater 3000 treatment, the movie still bored me. What do you think, Jeff?
I think Reptilicus is one of the titles one might think of when asked to come up with the worst of the best of AIP. Yes, the effects are terribly goofy, and yes, some of the characters look and feel odd to my American eyes, thinking Peterson in particular. But if anyone wants to create a Godzilla-like film and set it in their own country, and this is what they came up with, I think it deserves all the respect in the world. We touched on the differences between the American and Danish Reptilicus versions, and I don't want to go too deeply into it, but we did watch a few scene comparisons between the two versions on YouTube, and it could be argued that, with the possible exception of that extra song Cheryl mentioned, the Danish version may be superior to the AIP version. The biggest faults I had with the AIP version are the animated green slime that Reptilicus is constantly spitting up, and the scene where the farmer is eaten by Reptilicus just looks weird. Neither of these occur in the Danish version. Instead of swallowing the farmer, Reptilicus just stomps into their house, and I think that's a lot more effective. And not to mention Reptilicus gets to fly in the Danish version. But I'm grading the AIP version here, and fortunately for Reptilicus, I've always found laughable special effects endearing. The only other negative note I have is the character of Peterson. He's just so odd, and you know he's going to be trouble from the first minute we see him. He's dressed differently than the other characters, and it's obvious the character is there to serve as comic relief. But the intended audience of the AIP version gets a little culture shock on what serves as funny from these two different countries. As a side note, I love the backstory where Denmark had a history of producing comedy and drama films, but had never made a genre picture. And then they made Reptilicus. And while Journey to the Seventh Planet would follow, for the most part, their film industry would return to producing comedies and dramas, which makes Reptilicus stand out like a sore thumb as this wacky experiment they tried once, and I really love that. The only other thing I want to mention is that, despite its size, Reptilicus really wasn't all that destructive. We hear about a lot of destruction, but we don't see it. I imagine he broke through the wall of the room he was being held in, and he probably devoured Dr. Dalby. He did destroy some cows, a farmhouse, and ate at least one farmer. It's kind of hard to tell. It looks like he eats one farmer twice. And he did capsize a couple of stock-footed ships. And he squished Captain Brandt as well, but Brandt kind of brought that on himself. But once Reptilicus came to town, he wasn't knocking down buildings like Godzilla would have done. Reptilicus seemed more content to rub his face against them, kind of like a big cat. It was the military that did most of the destruction in town. I think Reptilicus is a fun, dumb movie. And while I can't compare it to the Danish version because I haven't seen it all the way through, what I did see did seem to pale in comparison to that. So if the Danish version were to receive 5 stars on a 5-tier scale, the AIP version would be worth a 4, but we're working with a 3-tier scale, so I'm going to have to upgrade Reptilicus to awesome status and give it an A.
Wow. I think we had the same issue with Conga. You loved it. I didn't. I didn't love this. You did. I'm not surprised that we're this far apart because it's happened before.
Well, I'm trying to be less critical of these films and just grade them upon how much I enjoy them.
Well, I think the problem is that I didn't enjoy it. I can find enjoyment in the silliest of monster movies, but there just is a breaking point for me where I lose it. And this one didn't make me laugh as much. What I saw didn't endear me to it.
Well, I think if this exact same production had been made in America with all American actors, I probably wouldn't give it as high a rating as I did, but I just enjoyed the weirdness of the whole thing.
Yes, we have to agree to disagree on this one too.
So that's all we have on Reptilicus and this episode of the American International Podcast. Until next time, I'm Jeff Markin.
And I'm Cheryl Lightfoot.
And we'll meet you at the drive-in. Follow the American International Podcast on Instagram and Letterboxd at AIP_pod and on Facebook at facebook.com/American International Podcast.
The American International Podcast is produced and edited by Jeff Markin.
A man whose mind is distorted by hatred.
And Cheryl Lightfoot.
A girl hungry for too many things.
The American International Podcast is part of the Pop Culture Entertainment Network.